Hello, welcome to the Tumble Tankard. I am Jim, aka Argent Wind, and I am your host for DM&D Chat, where we talk about all things Dungeons and Dragons and running Dungeons and Dragons, especially. Tonight we have a little bit different episode. We are talking about, in the honor of Halloween, talking about how to make your games a little more spooky, or how to maybe run some horror one shots. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to remind you, if you're not part of our Discord server, make sure you check out House of Gamers. Lots of places to play and join in on some D&D games. We may have a couple new ones coming up here with some open slots, so keep watching for that. And I'll be telling people all about it here as well once those become available. We do have a game that's going on right now, so if you're in our Discord and after done watching me, of course, you want to hop in there and see that game here, go check that out if you want to. I'm sure they'd love to have more people watching and checking things out. So with that, I do run in one of our D&D campaigns, Avarice: The Shattered World. The episodes are up on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and check out those. We have another episode coming up this Saturday, and uh, last week was kind of spooky. It had some pretty dark elements to it, literally and figuratively, and there's more coming up. So just keeping that in mind here as we move forward into the Halloween spirit. But tonight we're going to talk about making games bringing more horror elements to your game in honor of Halloween. Now, first, I want to point out D&D, by its very nature, is not really a horror game. And what I mean by that is the fact that you have characters who have these powerful abilities. You have clerics that can turn undead. You have people with magical weapons and amazing powers and abilities that allow them to tear through bad guys pretty fast. So in D&D, the ghosts, the monsters, the demons, all the things that you fight in the game have stats. They've got armor class, they've got hit points. They're meant to be taken down. And in a lot of horror genres, that's not really the case. You can't take down the bad guys. You can hope to escape from them, you can hope to survive them, but taking them down sometimes isn't an option. So before we start talking about D&D and how to make that work in there, I want to point out there's some other horror games, some other role-playing games to try out if you're interested in them. First off, when talking about horror, you cannot go wrong with Call of Cthulhu. H.P. Lovecraft and the Lovecraft universe there is an absolute gem when it comes to horror and just crazy insanity, literally, um, with all kinds of eldritch, horrible monsters and cultists. And really, Call of Cthulhu is not about fighting monsters. It's about surviving what's going on and maybe stopping the end of the world. It's very great for one shots. Campaigns in Call of Cthulhu don't really work all that well in my experience, but it's great for one shots and a chance to kind of play through these epic, crazy, dark, horrible encounters. Um, on the flip side, you have games from White Wolf like Vampire the Masquerade, where you get to play the monsters, playing as a vampire or a werewolf or some sort of fey changeling. And so if that's more your speed and want to be able to be the monsters, check out White Wolf. There's all different kinds of scenarios around there, and a very rich, deep world in this dark, dark setting. So check that out if that's more your speed. Another game I've only seen, I've never actually experienced here, but it's a really interesting concept, is a game called 10 Candles. It's a great party game for a one-shot thing where literally your timer till everything goes bad or you're just done is 10 candles. And at various points in the story, you snuff a candle and you snuff the next one here. And at each point there, once the last candle is gone, the game is over. And who knows what's happened. So it's a very interesting concept there. You can check out some videos on YouTube for it and see how it's played. But it's very cool idea for a very dark setting with some real urgency to it. But anyone who knows me and has been to conventions with me is going to know my number one horror game for horror to run a horror setting in, and that's going to be Dread. Dread is a very simple game. It's one of the simplest you can imagine. Its only mechanic is a Jenga tower. And anytime your characters are doing anything dangerous or potentially life-threatening or poking their nose into places that could get them killed, they pull from the tower. The tower falls, the character dies. It's that simple. Now, it's a narratively rich story game that allows you to really jump in and play with those genres. I've done a number of different game settings there. And the characters really aren't, they don't have stats, they don't have roles, they don't have anything like that. You have a questionnaire that gives you some role playing hooks for the question, for the characters and how they might be linked either as rivals or allies to the other party members. And it can really play out in some fun ways in the story, depending on how your players enjoy it. But I gotta say, it's been a lot of fun running Dread over the years, and it's perfect for one shots. It's perfect for those terrible, horrible scenarios that you can really just go and see who manages to survive. So check out Dread if you're interested in some horror stories there. Now, horror in D&D or any role-playing system there are some things to keep in mind when you're making a horror setting. And I got some questions here, which is great. If anybody out there listening has some questions, pop them in now. I will be kind of rolling back up through chat there to see them. There is quite a bit of a delay, so this will give me a chance to kind of go back through some previously asked questions, and I've got a few in the queue already. So don't hesitate if you have a question there to throw it on out. But to get into horror, to get into a horror setting for maybe a session with your D&D game or a campaign, or with any sort of maybe a one shot you want to run for a group of people, you want to look at a number of elements. And the first thing I get to consider is what's your spook? What is the thing that's the threat to the party, to your group of characters here? And there's a number of categories that kind of fall into some specific subgenres of horror. And the first one is a fairly obvious one, slasher. You're talking about your Jason Voorhees, your Michael Myers, your Freddy Krueger. You're also talking about things like Alien or Predator. These are also slashers. Would you have one powerful, overpowering enemy that is going to keep coming back, and it's going to be a matter of trying to find a way to get them contained, maybe destroy them, but probably not in the case of some of these guys, or just flat out escape from them. And so that slasher genre is a classic one of like that major, terrible, unstoppable enemy you have to get away from. Another genre of horror there is going to be your supernatural. Your ghosts, your demons, those things that involve possessions and those things you can't see, the creepy ambiance and everything else. Which reminds me, let's get a little bit of ambience going here. So the idea of that thing you can't see, that phenomenon that you experience and have to try to figure out what's going on. There's a lot of clue finding and mystery, and then eventually kind of ramping up into more and more dangerous things as the supernatural aspect becomes more deadly. That can be a very good fun time. The thing about D&D is that supernatural, like ghosts and stuff, they have rules for them. So what I'm going to tell you in a one shot or in a scenario, break those rules. Make the ghost do things or survive things that the party may not expect. Make a legendary action. Make sure that ghost can reform somewhere and come back. Make sure that ghost can do things around the area. So the idea of they're not that easy to kill. You don't just take it out and it's gone. There's something you have to do to keep it from coming back. So something to keep in mind when it comes time to supernatural type haunts. Another classic spook is your horde. Your zombie horde, your skeleton horde, your horde of aliens, anything that's where the threat is an overwhelming number of odds. Yes, you can take them out. Yes, you can stop them, but they keep coming. And it becomes a matter of survival and attrition. And it's a very different scenario for horror where you're not worried about one thing, you're worried about all of them. And it's a matter of holding out till you find a way to get away, or holding out till you find out what's causing the problem can be stopped, or just flat out surviving. So the horde is another fun scenario in terms of horror that can really kind of drive things along here. And you have those lulls in the story where the horde seems to have slackened, or you've managed to get a break in the wave of enemies that's coming toward you there. Also very fun for a one shot of various scenarios you run into. Um, the last shot, well, the next subgenre of horror is cosmic, and this is where you get into your cosmic horror, like Cthulhu. These are things that you don't deal with these things. You don't interact with these things directly because you will just die. There is nothing you can do about them because they are so far beyond your comprehension and your power levels that they're just an entity that's there. And you're dealing more with how to prevent them from coming into the world. If there's a cultist group of cults trying to summon up this eldritch horror, it's not about confronting the horror, it's about confronting the cultists to stop them, to prevent the ritual, or doing a ritual of your own to seal the thing away, to close that gate. So that cosmic horror is very much an issue of there's a time limit involved. Something bad is going to happen unless you can stop it. Another big aspect of cosmic horror is sanity. You may survive, but you may lose your mind. And so there is some sanity mechanics that you can find dotted around for D&D. So it's something to look for, an idea of making will saves and wisdom saves or other saving throws to prevent going crazy or to prevent from being stunned or just locking up and freezing in these terrible, horrible scenarios. So again, the cosmic horror. And the last genre isn't really a genre unto itself. I call it the mastermind. This is the evil scientist that has a monster, or this evil scientist who's taking the Jekyll and Hyde scenario, or this high priest summoning up the undead horde you're dealing with. This uh, cultist that has summoned up a demon that's acting more like a slasher or acting more in a supernatural capacity. And so the mastermind often isn't a threat in and of itself. It's setting up another threat, and maybe the way you resolve the threat is finding the mastermind and taking them out. And so when thinking of your horror scenarios and thinking up your of thinking up what genre of horror you're talking about here, it's really good to kind of keep that in mind of like what are some iconic uh, movies, TV shows, book series, things like that that you're kind of going for. Is it more of an Evil Dead feel or an Army of Darkness feel? Is it more of a Walking Dead thing or is it more supernatural? Or Blair Witch. All of these things are different inspirations you can take for scenarios you can put your parties into where they never know what's going to happen, but it feels familiar and they know the things to worry about. The fun asset to keep in mind here is that we all know horror, and the party will often think up ways of scaring themselves, and you just run with it and have fun with it. So again, pick your genre and go like go whole into it. So now you have your genre. How do you change the feel of the game? Well, first of all, ambiance, music, sounds. All of these things add to the creepiness of the factor. Lighting can be, if you're in a room, if you're playing in a room with people physically, the bringing the lights down in the room, putting some candles around the room, adding some decorations. All of those things are going to go a long ways toward giving that spooky feel, that change in the environment that's going to make people like realize that something bad is going to happen. You want to, with besides ambiance, think about your delivery. In a horror scenario, you're often going to talk in a very deliberate, very distinct way. A little Rod Sterling, a little Crypt Keeper, maybe, depending on what kind of feel you're going for, or just ways of delivering the information. When you talk to someone and you can tell them there's something dark and sinister lurking beyond the shadows seem to be moving, the sounds that you can hear twisting at the back of your mind. using that tone of voice, bringing them into it, and then ramping up, and then giving the tension and showing them between your body language and your voice, you can really bring a lot of that tension along with it. If you deliver your information like you normally would, it's not going to have the same impact. So you may want to practice it a little bit. Try that narrator voice. Try that different way of speaking and being very clear in the creepy factor that you can play up in your voice. Okay. So in terms of the game, you want the idea that what makes horror, what really sells horror is the danger. The players honestly feel they're in danger by something. It may turn at some point and they may realize that they can deal with a thing, but that initial, oh no, this is bad, is a great way to get them into what's happening. And so that sense of danger or the sense of helplessness, they've lost things they need. They're in the dark. They're locked away from places. And suddenly there's this idea of like, what can we do? Where are we? What's going on? That helplessness, that sense there drives up the tension some more. So you want to think about what's out there, what you can do to them, what you can do to make them feel like they just can't do what they normally would do. That badass D&D party suddenly can't kill this thing. They're just stuck. And so the idea of bringing in isolation, where they're stuck someplace, they're stuck in an environment of some kind that's going to prevent them from getting away. So that isolation, along with that fear, that danger, that hopelessness, all of those things drive up the tension in your game. And so, obviously, in a long running campaign, this is a scenario you don't want to derail and destroy the game, but it's a great way to kind of bring it in elements of that, and then having that ray of light, they can move out of it again and back into the normal campaign. So fun little things you can do with your party. And in a one shot, you have that established. You're basically dropping unknown characters into a setting where they just are going to have a hard time. Let's just say. The other thing to think about there is your environment. Go with the classics, the haunted house, abandoned buildings, or an abandoned city or town of some kind, tunnels, under caves or tombs or catacombs, underground isolated sections there where they might get lost if they wander too far, or things might be caved in and they don't have anywhere to go, or something seals behind them and now they're trapped in here until they figure a way out. Being lost in a forest or a labyrinth or some place where no matter where they go, they can't get anywhere. Again, this is that helplessness, that danger, and then you start putting in the monsters and the bad guys and the terrible things in there, and now you're going to see some things start happening. And so keep your environment is a lot of times your environment is as much of a cast member as anything else in the horror. Evil Dead in the cabin in the isolated cabin in the woods, Camp Crystal Lake for Jason, obviously the dreamscape for Freddy Krueger. All of these things can become part of the story and they become almost a cast member of themselves. And you're stuck in these places trying to figure them out. Silent Hill, again, the idea of the mist, where you can't leave a place because you leave and you end up walking right back in where you came out. All those elements are great ways to ramp up that tension and that fear. But in a situation of a one shot, or especially if you're in the middle of a campaign, this is one session in your campaign, you want to work toward a resolution. And so the idea they find clues along the way, they manage to escape from the bad guy, they manage to figure out what's going on. You want to get to that resolution. And so the resolution could be they escape the thing. They could solve whatever riddle or whatever problem is going on that solves the issue of whatever it is. It could just be a matter of surviving long enough until the daylight comes and the thing goes away. It's also like foiling the plan. If the cultists are trying to summon up this thing here, you're trying to foil their plan and stop them from doing this thing. Or it could lead to an outcome could be it could be defeat. And especially in a one shot, the party might lose. The bad thing might happen. You've if you've seen some of the endings to some of the movies, those things there, the good guys don't win. The bad guy, they manage to get away, but not quite. And so, in a one shot, it's a great thing to do. In a campaign, not so much. And I will say this: a lot of times, people will use in a campaign setting there where this kind of stuff happened there. Try not to use the overly used thing of it was all a dream. They wake up and it didn't happen. That really cheapens all the struggle and everything they went through. And so we've seen it in video games, we've seen it in movies, and very few times is it done well that it was never really there. They were never really in danger. That's a really tough thing to sell, and it's really an unsatisfying conclusion to a lot of really fun, crazy stories that are out there. So try to avoid that if you can. Um, and so when it comes to your one shots, again, think about what's going to be your main enemy, your protagonist, your antagonist, and what sort of feel you're going for. Drive that ambiance home, those feelings of helplessness and danger and isolation. Work on your environment. Really play up the setting that they're in. It's just creepy and terrible. And then figure out what's going to resolve the situation. It's and if you need to, draw on those classic horror movies or those classic stories that we've read. And while you don't want to recreate them exactly, take the inspiration from them and how they play out and how those things go. Because we'd all like to play out stories that feel familiar, but in some way different or new. So I hope that little synopsis there gives you a little bit to go on for starting up your own one shots. And again, if D&D doesn't work, or if working with an established party that's already really high level isn't going to work for these scenarios, try try a one shot D&D with much lower level characters, fewer abilities, less power level, less magic items, things that mean they don't have so much to draw on, which helps with that horror aspect. It's hard to scare high level players. They've seen it all, they've dealt with it all, they've killed it all. So you might consider those scenarios where what makes it scares them is going to destroy anybody lower. But what they just walk over could be a huge threat to a starting level party. So fun things to consider there as you do your horror and your scary, spooky one shots or scenarios. Um, so I do have a couple preloaded questions here. I'm going to start up with some of those. It's a little bit early for questions, but I've already got a couple to go through. If you have other questions there, throw them in there. Any comments about scariness? I see some agreement from Justin here, focusing on ambiance and fear of the unknown being so huge. Exactly, those are elements to think of there. But if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I will get to them, and we'll start going through and answering the questions for you. First off, first question here: how do you make something that plays on the fears of each individual player and keep it consistently spooky for everyone while keeping continuity? It's a lot of pieces of that question there, so I'm going to try to break it down a little bit here. In terms of an ongoing campaign, you've seen probably either through their backstory or through the things they've experienced already in the game, what kind of scares them. So you might consider they've already had problems, or maybe they almost got killed by something when they were first starting off here. Drawing that back in plays on those fears of like, oh no, not this again. So while that player is going to be more feel more threatened and feel more fear at that specific thing here, the rest of the party may remember, oh no, this was bad. Oh, we've seen these kinds of things before. Oh, nothing we do is working. So keeping it spooky for everyone, there are universal things that are going to be a problem for everyone. Things that are in D&D, especially things that resist magic, and your spellcasters can't do anything to it, or things that just are immune to certain things, where suddenly you throw something out there and it just doesn't work. Those kind of things really help with driving up that danger in this. Oh no, I can't do what I normally do. What else can we do? So it keeps it in continuity because enemies are always changing. And if you're fighting a group of enemies that learn that you uh, have seen your capabilities throughout the time here, and a big villain or something like that, they're going to throw new things at you. They're going to do things that test you. And in some cases, that danger could be supernatural things and get that spooky sort of like fear-based things, or it's just tactically sound things they're doing. So again, you want to again play on those fears of the player of things they've experienced or things that they've already mentioned in their backstory, but bringing the other players into it and showing why this is so bad, or letting them help that player overcome this problem makes a whole lot of interesting scenarios for your party to deal with. Hope that helps out there. Um, what's the best way to set up a one shot and still have the story mean something, or does it even necessarily have to have a story? It depends what you're going for. If you're a group of low-level adventurers stuck in a on an island with a crazed killer, not a whole lot of story involved there, but what the details come in are the little elements of why is this thing here? Where did this thing come from? How do we get out of here? What's there? So that's where it may not mean something overall, but there can be elements of story the party can get along the way because nothing's more boring to me at least, and maybe to you as well, as a horror story that doesn't tell a story. It's just things happening. Or the story that it makes is so convoluted or weird it doesn't make any sense. So you try to walk a balance between story and action and the feelings of horror and dread and everything else. And so the best way the best way to set it up is keep that in mind. Figure your problem. Think of a couple creepy scenes that can happen, um, and then see what happens. It's obviously you know the set pieces. You know there's an abandoned cabin they can go to. You know there's a section of the woods. There's a strange altar in the basement of the house. All of these things are set pieces that you kind of preloaded in your mind. And so the party's going to get to these things eventually. What things can happen there? What can they learn? And then the story will kind of unfold by going to these locations and then trying to figure out what to do with them in the end. So a one shot, the tricky part is a one shot being an actual one shot. So think about maybe 3 or 4 encounters they could have. Don't get like a dozen encounters unless you want to go, hey, a dozen encounters, but they're only going to see 3 of them before this happens. And so keep it randomized that way if you want to, but really don't try like about 3, maybe 4 encounters before the big thing, the big resolution type things. And so they get enough information from those things to drive toward a conclusion. Hope that kind of gives some ideas of how to there. And so it can mean something. It obviously can, because if everyone's enjoying themselves, if everyone's into the story, into the players, they're invested in what's happening, that's what matters. So you want to go for that feeling there. Let's see. I've got 2 more questions loaded here, so if you have more questions there, start dropping in the chat there so we can go. I think something both scary but not gory for the more timid of players. Basically PG-13 over hard R and still be scary and entertaining. My last Dread game was literally a dark version of Toy Story. The players were all playing as animated dolls. And the threats to them was a spider, a big old spider, a cat, the dollhouse being knocked off the bed, some strange little green army men that were bad guys, and then a fire breaking out in the house and escaping. That was the story. Those were my bad guys. And so there was no blood, there was no gore, but it was creepy and weird, and seeing this strange thing of this strange multi-legged thing that a doll wouldn't know what that is, or recognizing the threat of that cat because they've seen it tear apart one of their friends before. Um, those kind of things where you can get that horror element there without any gore. So there's that. So there's that kind of thing where you basically take away the gore by doing something else. Um, Great thing here. Best way to put players on edge. Tell them your character suddenly feels itchy. Talk about the sensations and the sensory aspects because that's going to make them feel a lot more like there's this feeling of something crawling up your back, or you feel the cold sweat beating up on your forehead and feel it running down the side of your face. You can hear the breathing of something off in the darkness, the rustle of leaves, the strange sounds. All of those things can go a long ways toward giving things, making things scarier without any gore. And then if you have the right kind of players describing the gore, the horrible whatever happens, I mean, the decapitations and the blood and all that other stuff there. Again, you know your audience when you're doing this. Obviously, one shots, you don't really have a session zero before a one shot. So you might want to be careful with people you don't know. If you are like at a con running things, maybe a quick disclaimer saying, hey, this may have some gore in it. Anyone have a problem with that? No, we're all good? Okay. Um, a lot of times, just asking that question will either get people to say, oh, you know what? Not the game for me. I'm going to duck out. Um, or if there's anything, it's like you can just say, do you have a problem with X, spiders, snakes, rats, whatever? And if so, then you do a quick switch of like, no spiders, there's any rats in the scene instead. Or no rats, there'll be snakes in the scene instead. So you can just kind of replace things as you go, or just say, remove it all entirely and just make it creepy stuff. Animated doll parts coming to life and moving. Strange little rocks that seems to that grow legs and eyes and stalks and sort of like look at you strangely and twitch and move toward you. All these little things can really go toward driving up that scary factor without any gore. And it's the more PG-13 of things of you don't have to worry about the violent, horrible murders, more of the creepy factor. And so you kind of look at your genre, look at your players, look at what you're going to go with, various things there. Um, so last question from Aaron. We got some more coming up here. So, how would you make stuck in a manor or castle, and you have to solve a whodunit? Think of the quest of Oblivion or Clue. Gotcha. Okay. Well, the simple thing is you walk in, the door seals shut. Now you're stuck in a castle. So now it becomes what sealed it? What's happening? And this is where the events and the house being a cast member in the story really comes into being here. So you basically have the idea of you go with the creepy elements of the house. You thought of the different things that can happen. They don't even involve a ghost necessarily. It just might be a strange something happening with the lights, a strange thing with the sounds. All of these things can turn into more environmental aspects that make the creepy factor. And then finding out how do we get out? Or there's someone dead here. Who killed them? What happened? Was it any of us? And this is where you can kind of, in a one shot, like you could literally play a game of Clue of somebody killed this person. And so who was it? And so now it becomes a matter of finding out clues and finding out pieces there. The difficult part of that is in a role playing game, making one person the murderer can be tricky depending on your players. So the fun thing might be there being multiple NPCs in the house along with the party members and finding out who did it. Or maybe a party member doesn't know they did it because they got possessed and shot somebody else in the party. Right, Aaron? Um, Never mind. But you really have the idea of there could be all kinds of scenarios around a house or castle, the solving the whodunit part of there. It might be not who murdered somebody, but who is keeping you inside, or who is causing this place to be haunted, or how do you stop this place from being what it is, from being a problem. A little bit like scenario that we experienced in my game there. Um, and so part of that is when you're designing it, think of the clues, think of the things you need to find, the places you need to go. Um, so think about like what things are in what parts of the house, what things make sense, what things can be things they need to go into. The fun thing about trying to use skills like perception and investigation to find those secrets and find those maybe a secret passage or things like that where the house becomes a much bigger thing to deal with. Um, and with that in mind, you might need to work on a map. You might need to really delve into a large map of the area. If it's a matter of stuck in a forest, it doesn't matter which way you go, it's all the same. You don't need that as much, but in like a house scenario where you're trying to say, here is this place, here is this place, here is this place, um, it might need to go ahead and and have a full map for it to work. Um, let's see. Fun design of monsters, not traditionally. Oh yes, designed. Take a monster that's not traditionally designed for horror and twist them into a horror monster. Um, my DM on Thursdays is a master of this, where basically the things we're fighting are monstrous versions of other things. These have been twisted by horrible magics and diseases and things like that makes them into something that's much more horrific than the thing that it started off as. That's a great way to go in terms of making a bad guy, um, or making the thing you need to deal with is that monstrous, horribly twisted version of something that isn't normally a horror element. Um, we've seen horror movies where you have like the demonic unicorn is killing things, or the weird little leprechaun thing that's horrible. These things, um, again, those kind of elements of like some strange creature that's empowered in some way. So great suggestion there from Green Dragon. Thank you. Um, uh, Sources of horror in media you think would translate into a one shot? Cabin in the Woods, um, or Evil Dead, Army of Darkness. I think the issue with some of those is it might be a little bit too big for a one shot. A one shot, you want to think of something along the lines of like Friday the 13th, a Halloween, things where there's a specific, even like Alien makes a great one shot, where the environment is limited, the enemies aren't insanely complicated, but you can really delve into that. Something like an Evil Dead Cabin in the Woods might be something that happens over more than one session. If you have a mini series horror game to deal with, that can work for in your favor. You can deal with bringing in those kind of things of if this is too much for one, break it out into more than one if you can. But if you're going to be doing a one shot, you really want to think about how do I make this happen within my X number of hours? 4 to 5 hours typically tops. You might get a little more if you're at a convention, so they make it 6 to 8 hours, depending on your players and your timeline you have. But you're going to really want to work into what your timeline is going to be for events to keep it flowing along. Um, so, um, yeah, so I think if you have the luxury of inter so adding bits of horror to a campaign, obviously like a Curse of Strahd, you're dealing with a vampire and all of his minions. This is a full campaign that can be a horror story. Now, a piece of that might be dealing with one part of this might be considered a one shot. So, so the idea of you do this thing, you resolve this, you move on. And so for the one shot after that is that we do this one little piece of it, but it might go into other more into a larger story as you progress. Okay. So hope that helps for translating one shots there. So in your experience for horror one shot specifically, do you find a one shot structure like Alien or Aliens be more fun? Um, Aliens become too grindy and combat could ruin the vibe. I have to agree. So you might want to consider, rather than the endless, continuous fighting, the idea of you have your big fight and then you realize you're going to be overrun. So it becomes, how do we escape from this thing and get to the next part of it? So it's kind of that horde mentality of you have the horde happening where you engage the horde, realize you're not going to beat the horde, get away from the horde, and now how do we survive the horde moving in on us, or what's causing the horde to come after us? So the structure there becomes less combat, 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 combat. It's more like combat. Oh no, we need to figure out to deal with this. Maybe a final combat at the end. So your encounters aren't all combat. Um, so the vibe becomes that first big combat where they try to fight them. That's where the helplessness and the isolation and the danger really show through of, oh no, this isn't something we're going to handle. They're just going to keep coming. We need to get away. And so now it becomes the rest of the scenario ends up being less fight these things and more, how do we stop them or how do we get away from them? So I hope that kind of speaks to the structure of a one-shot mentality. Now, again, if it's a campaign setting, you're talking about multiple scenarios and you have combats dotted through multiple sessions. So it becomes a little less urgent to deal with it all in one setting or one sitting. So that you can deal with there. Um, let's see. Like to homebrew your own monsters or implementing from D&D or a combination of the two. Um, I like a combination of the two. I like to start with a horror, like an enemy, and add abilities that make things more interesting. Someday I'll tell you about some ones I've made in the past here. Um, once kind of a campaign wrap up kind of thing that happens down in the future there. But there have been a number of enemies that I've started with one thing and added abilities to either through legendary actions or legendary resistances or layer actions are great for monsters in D&D. Um, but you can take a normal monster and add more to it, more abilities that kind of ramp up the ambiance of the feel, that give it special abilities that make the danger a lot higher than it normally would be, um, or turn them into something that's much more horrific than the base it was built on originally. So I think using the D&D monsters as they're written as a starting point is a good good way to go. You can build something from the ground up. There's no reason not to. If you have the ability, if you have the time and the ideas. But if you just want to start with something there and then add more to it to make it more of a threat, to make it more of a horrific thing to deal with. Um, Hope that answers that question there. Um, and so that homebrew monster, the adding the elements to it there, again, as I mentioned here, don't forget you're dealing with something that's established. So a lot of times you're in its home, you're in its layer. It's going to have a lot of layer actions, and it's going to be able to do things that don't normally work in D&D. There's going to be abilities that it has that someone goes, where did that come from? It's a story-based thing. You're in this thing's layer. It knows what to do. It knows how to mess with you, and it's going to make your life difficult in ways you didn't consider or wouldn't expect from that type of monster. So you can really deal with that. You really that can really help you with um, ramping up the horror aspect of your game by using the layer again, using the environment against the players in ways that it may be part of the monster, maybe part of the threat, may just be part of the part and parcel of where they're at. Um, Question here: how do you determine the timing of a one shot as opposed to a session during a campaign based around horror? Like, make sure the players make it to the end of the session. Um, uh, Really, you want to sketch it out. Um, have an idea of where you are in time. If you know you have 4 hours, you want to think, okay, I want these scenes to happen. They're going to go to this cabin. They're going to find something terrible there. They're going to get attacked over here and escape and get over to here. They're going to end up in the cave where there's a ritual that's taken place, and they're going to find elements there. And they're going to get over to this place where they're going to do something to undo whatever's keeping them locked away here and escape. So you want to think of like, how do I move this along, and what can happen in between? So you can establish the problem, move them along to the first part there, move them along to the second part, move them along to the third. And most players are going to kind of follow the trail because they see where it leads. And they may try to go off on a tangent, but this is where a one shot is often a bit of a railroad. There's a limited number of options, especially since you built it to be here's the story, how do you get through it? Um, it is a little bit of a juggling act to make it so that it doesn't feel like it's on rails, but you have clues to lead them where they want to go. And you might have a couple branches where they could go here or here, or they may throw a loop at you and you might go, okay, how do I get them? They're going completely around this thing. How do I get them over to here? So you know the story, you know where it's headed. So don't be afraid to kind of draw them back in and see the if you know you have 4 hours, you've got point A, point B, point C, point D, point E, and you go, okay, well, at point, if we're at the 2 hour mark here, we better be in the middle here at some point. And we're at the 3 hour mark, they better be getting to that point where they're finding things out. And then, okay, how do we move on to the resolution? And it kind of comes a little bit more naturally over time, but at the very least, watch your clock, see where you're at, see where things are moving, and think in your mind, where is this going? Am I going to have time to get there? And you may have to skip ahead. You may have to give them an extra clue in some place to get them to move on and pass out this other place and go to where it needs to happen. So don't be afraid to adjust on the fly if you have to. But then again, if you're in a campaign setting and this is one session, you can stretch it out into a second session. You can sort of like get them to where they're if you can get them to the point where they're good and truly screwed, and they've got some ideas but they don't know where they're going yet. And then the next session there, how do they move on and get past that, and then have a resolution, and then figure out where they're going next. So you have a little more leeway in a campaign of being able to stretch out what happens before and after, and using that to your advantage. Okay. Favorite locations for horror settings. Oh, there are so many. I mentioned a few of them. I'm obviously, it depends on the scenario you're trying to set up there. But obviously, haunted houses are great. Ghost towns are a lot of fun. Places where there's just nothing there and they're trying to find out. Especially if there's something that keeps them in there. Um, uh, you like the idea of like the mist surrounding a town and you can't get out, like a Silent Hill or the Mist. Um, Something that's kind of you're stuck in a place, but you're not like in this very limited environment. I'm less interested in caves and catacombs because there's only one environment you're dealing with. Um, it's hard to really make that go beyond multiple things. Although it's great for a one shot. They're stuck in a cave. They find various chambers. They find different things. It's also tends to be very much of a railroad because you're just following the cave. Um, but it's a little limited in terms of like the variability in the environment and the ways they can go. I much prefer like more open-ended places that are sealed in some way. Being stuck on an island and there's no ship. Um, Being locked into a building, being stuck in a town. Those are all kind of my favorites for horror settings. And balancing humor and creepiness. You may have and considering players' actions, some take it less seriously than others. Hey, everyone deals with horror in their own way. Some want to crack jokes, some want to lighten the mood, some want to do various things like that, and you want to maybe not wash that. You always have the comic relief in a movie. Somebody that's cracking the joke, somebody you can't take seriously. If you have to, the monster reaches out and grabs that person, then they're gone. In a one shot, sorry, you're gone. and now they're a spectator in the game. If you really need that to stop and someone's being out there, you have the ability to do that. In a one shot, in a horror setting, people get grabbed, people get bad things happen to, and that ramps up the danger. So if you have to make him a sacrifice, I'm not going to say to do it all the time there, and it may be that somebody else getting grabbed suddenly makes them go, "Oh, this is serious." I wow. They may change the mood suddenly, and they have that sort of like epiphany for that character of that player, maybe that character, that I better do something about this. This isn't going to work. So again, you don't want to quash the humor and the fun because it is a fun time, but the creepiness kind of like, how do you move things along when they just want to crack jokes? Well, you're in control of the monsters. You're in control of the pacing and the story. So if you need to, do something horrific that moves them along. The monsters show up. The somebody does that at that time they think, oh, we have time to relax and rest. No, you don't. Which means another idea for D&D here. Try not to let them get long rests and short rests. Their abilities will get whittled down over time, and if you're stuck in a setting where this is happening in one night or happening there, there's some great uh, tension building by the fact that they're running out of resources. They're running out of spell slots. They've used up their potions. They've used up their class abilities, and they may want to try to sneak in that short rest. And that's a great time for the monster attack. They're not going to get a long rest, so just kind of keep that in mind here. It's not going to happen. So um, depending on the scenario we have set up there. But again, it's ways of ramping up that tension and that everything else by not giving them a chance to recover. So keep that in mind as especially in a D&D style horror game. Um, don't give them those chances to recover and get those resources back. Okay. Um, some great scenes from movies or books you personally took inspiration from. I have a hard time picking one. There's so many, um, and they all sort of filter around in my brain and kind of sit in there. Um, I don't think I can think of just one specifically, but I mean, you guys in the chat right now, throw some out to me right now. Some things that you've seen that are really stick with you or things you draw on. I mean, I mentioned a couple different movies, a couple different video games, TV shows. All of those things really inspire me. I played in a number of games with horror elements there. Like I mentioned, taking the idea of this Toy Story and turning it into a horror game, or haunted house type things like 13 Ghosts, or what's some other good horror movies? Haunting of Bly Manor. Um, a great moment if you want to scare the crap out of somebody. Well, I'm not 100% a fan of the movie here, but it follows. If you've seen that movie, you know the moment I'm talking about. That one is still one of the scariest things I've ever seen. And so the idea of that unexpected moment, that oh god, um, dark a dark version of Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, exactly. It's such a great taking a fairy tale or a lighter hearted thing and turning it into a darker version. Yes, the Brothers Grimm, taking those fairy tale stories and making them dark, using them as inspiration. They can really help inspire the story if you use those ideas of that's kind of an element here, and the players may not quite get. They may not figure that out right away if you aren't too obvious with it, but all of a sudden they're like, "Oh no, we're in Wonderland. Oh no, we're in Oz. Oh, geez, we're stuck in Hansel and Gretel right now." And so the idea of those kind of like the dark stories can really ramp up to give that little aspect of the familiar, along with the unknown of like, is this going to be similar? Is it going to be different? And so it really kind of like gives someone to latch onto. Um, Predator type NPCs and xenomorph type creatures. Yes, the unstoppable creature that's just so alien. One of the reasons why I love using sloths against my party is that they're very much like xenomorphs, in what they do and how they act. Although they're a little bit less, they're a little more colorful. But the idea of this thing in the dark, this thing that does horrible things and infects you. Um, I will say a great scenario for a one shot, and there's different ways you can do it. John Carpenter's The Thing. Being in an isolated place with a danger where somebody in the party is infected and working against the rest and trying to figure out how to survive. So The Thing is a great way to go in terms of a dark, creepy story that makes for a great one shot. And the idea that at the end of it, either the place gets blown up, the airstrike comes in, and you hope that the alien didn't get away or whatever it was. So it's a fun, really fun way to do a one shot. And so things like that, where again that isolated aspect and a limited number of people that can be involved, and the unknown and sort of the interplay with each other, that can be a lot of fun too. Um, you have to have the right party. You don't want them actually coming to blows or actually getting any majorly hurt feelings, but there's some fun ways to do that with the right group of people. It's a really good time. Um, done one with the Boogeyman or Shadows in the Dark. I mean, Shadows in the Dark sounds a little familiar to you guys, to my party from last week. Um, but um, having a Boogeyman style enemy, um, having someone that uh, you have an enemy that needs to be dealt with there is a great way to go. Again, that's sort of that slasher type of enemy or that supernatural thing or some combination thereof. Um, really makes a fun scenario for people to deal with there. Okay, craziest one shot. Okay, we're almost out of time here, so I'm going to talk about one of my favorites, and it comes from Dread. It was a game I rode 4 years ago at convention, and it was called. I entitled this episode this game "Strangeness on a Train," and it was literally the party were all different, either passengers or uh, people that work on the train, and they're literally there's a limited number of cars. There's a sleeper car, a passenger car, another passenger car, a dining car, the engine, the baggage car, and the caboose. That's the whole train. It's the whole environment. And I had 6 players that were there, including it was very much a 20s, 30s, 40s style of the game there, where you had like a doctor, a socialite, a performer, um, the inspector for the railway who was riding the train there, the porter who was working on the railway, and I think a merchant was the 6th character there who was basically. But the idea is that I had built-in little things like that were either allies or rivalries amongst the characters based on who they were. There were a couple other passengers. There were other people working on the train. But the fact is, they were stuck on this train, and bad things started to happen. First, the performer's manager was asleep in the sleeper car, and they were murdered inside the sleeper car by something. Blood on the floor, blood on the interior of the passenger, interior of the cabin. And what happened? Um, the cook in the dining car turned into a monster, basically the beast, I called it, kind of a werewolf kind of thing like that, and went out on the train. And as people were trying to go from car to car, this thing could grab one of them and get out there. The inspector goes into the engine. At one point, the train starts speeding up and rocketing down the tracks, and everyone's being jostled around. It's all kind of dangerous and everything. The inspector goes into the engine and sees the fireman standing there with an axe coated in blood, and the engineer, well, in the process of tossing the arm of the engineer into the firebox, and thus getting the train to move faster. So the inspector just closed the door, locked it, and went back to go dealing with other things. So these things on the train with the passengers was a great way to go, and what resolved it was um, involving a couple other NPCs and something in the caboose. We don't have time to go into the whole story there, but it was a lot of fun to deal with that because again, I had the characters that were sort of either allied or rivals with each other already, the unknown of the enemies, NPCs that were getting murdered by the monsters on the train there, a ghost in the sleeper car, the beast from the dining car, the fireman from the engine, and then a cultist that was on the train there as well. That was kind of the cause of all of this. So it was a lot of fun, and using bizarre little Jenga towers is a great time for Dread as well. I have quite the collection. Um, so, but um, I hope that kind of gives. I hope you had some good ideas for maybe your own one shots, your own horror scenarios there. If you ever want to throw out more questions, put them in the discussion, the comments on this video, or send them to me via Discord. I can always maybe throw some more inspiration your way. If you do get a chance to run a spooky one shot or to add some horror elements to your game there, I hope it goes well, and I hope that everyone enjoyed today's episode. Again, if you're wanting to take that dip into the DM's chair, and even if it's just a one shot, and you want to look for players in that, and you're on our Discord, jump in the D&D campaigns channel and just put a call out to players. We can set up one shots or campaigns in there, and get some players. I see our DM from Monday had an impromptu game today that just added that just wrapped up a little bit ago. But we've had some great enthusiastic players, and I know there's people that want to play more. So if you do want to take a try at that DM's chair, please jump in there. If you need help or encouragement or inspiration, reach out to any one of our DMs, me or anyone else that's listed in the D&D campaigns channel. We'd love to help you out and get more games going for other people to join in because yes, we all want to play more. I hope you have a great holiday weekend. Next week, or holiday coming up here, holiday season. Next week, we're doing the episode I was planning, which is episode about keeping it going, keeping a campaign going, and how tricks and things you can do to help prevent campaigns from stalling out. Because we've all been in those situations where campaigns have either just stopped or just sort of petered out. And some ways to kind of help with that phenomenon of happening, to prevent that from happening unless you're trying to end a campaign. So ways of keeping it going, or some things to think about as you're wanting to end a campaign. So I hope to be there for that next Thursday. Again, Avarice on Saturday, 2 o'clock Pacific time, and again, join us in the House of Gamers. Make those D&D campaigns and jump in and have fun with this. So I hope you all have a great time, and thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.